Funding for this video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you.
With over 1,000 monsters to choose from in D&D, it can be hard to know which ones to use, and even harder to know how to play them. What weapons do they favor? What tactics would they use? How do they interact with other types of monsters? These are all questions that can come up to DMs that are looking to make their combats more enticing for their players. It's certainly one that I struggled with. That's why I'm back today with another monster breakdown for D&D. Hello again everyone, I'm Bill from AltRoll, and today I'm going to dive into a brief history of a D&D creature, how that history was adapted into 5th edition, and how this lore can help game masters make their combat encounters better. So, whether you're here for the cool lore breakdown or for the combat tactics, I'm hoping to give you a lot more to chew on when it comes to the monsters we face in D&D. For episode 29, let's whip our wings together for some scaly draconic cousins. The Wyvern. The Wyvern is a mythical dragon with 2 legs, 2 wings, and a pointed tail that acted as a venomous stinger. Originating from the ancient concept of winged snakes, which goes back as far as ancient Egypt, the wyvern itself began appearing in European heraldry in the 14th century, specifically in England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. They were also featured in medieval bestiaries, with this depiction of what appears to be a wyvern appearing in Liber Floridus, a medieval encyclopedia compiled by Lambert of St. Omer sometime in the 11th or 12th century. By the 16th century, 4-legged dragons started to become more popular, and proper distinction was made between the 2-legged wyvern and the 4-legged dragon, though some entries stated that they are related to each other. The wyvern itself remained a mascot for many logos across history, and in the modern day, it remains a staple in fantasy fiction, presented in The Hobbit, the Throne of Glass series, the Dragon's Dogma games, and Dungeons & Dragons. In tabletop gaming, the Wyvern's legacy can actually be traced all the way back to the fantasy supplement rules for Chainmail, the precursor to Dungeons & Dragons that came out in 1971. This didn't exactly give them lore or stats, however, and they were just kind of lumped in with chimeras as a monster option. In D&D itself, the Wyvern was introduced in the White Box Monsters and Treasure book in 1974. Classified as a smaller relative of dragons, wyverns never did have the fire-breathing or magical abilities of their larger relatives. Instead, they had a giant stinger on their tail filled with poison, though the original rules were vague as to whether this poison did a certain amount of damage or if it just killed you outright. While the wyvern was also included in the 1977 OD&D Monster Manual, it was kinda bare bones, and didn't really expand on much from its original depiction. It wasn't until 2nd edition's Monstrous Compendium Volume 1 in 1989 and the Monster Manual in 1993 that we got an in-depth wyvern description. Described as being 35 feet long and having a 50-foot wingspan, the wyvern was a terrifying sight to behold. Its skin ranged from dark brown to gray in color, and its 4-foot-long head was filled with long, sharp teeth. It used its 2 hind legs much like a bird would, and its tail was like that of a scorpion's, except it had a 2-foot-long stinger sticking out of it. This edition also explicitly says that wyverns are stupid, which is kind of rude to be honest, but also aggressive enough to almost always attack a creature that they see, though they will let prey go if it seems too powerful. Preferring to hunt solo, wyverns stay up in the air when possible, as they're much more dangerous that way. If forced to land, they can still put up a good fight, using a mixture of bites, claws, and stinger poison to defend itself. And defend itself it must, because its body parts were stated to be used for spell components, and would fetch a hefty price on the open market. Their ecology was expanded upon in Dragon Magazine Annual Number 1 in 1996, where Spike Jonze wrote The Ecology of the Wyvern. In this story, we learned that wyverns mark their territory with their poison, and when another wyvern wants to claim the land as their own, the two engage in an aerial battle. This battle mostly involves the wyverns trying to stick their stingers into each other's mouth, releasing their poison to be victorious. 3rd edition continued to feature the wyvern in both its 2000 and 2003 monster manuals. Unfortunately, most of its lore and abilities remained relatively the same from older editions, with a couple tweaks to how the poison worked. In 3rd edition, being stung by a wyvern forced a constitution check that reduced the target's constitution by 2d6, with them repeating the saving throw a minute later. While not doing damage in the traditional way, it operated similarly to the Shadow's Strength Drain ability, where it can kill a character outright if their constitution is reduced to 0. 4th edition also featured the Wyvern in its 2008 monster manual, but it only added a few interesting tidbits, like how they're technically closer in relation to drakes, not dragons, and that they can be domesticated if you raise them from birth. This edition also added the Fell Wyvern, a more powerful variant born of the Shadowfell, but this variant unfortunately did not make it into 5th edition's release in 2014. In 5th edition, a wyvern is described as having 2 scaly legs, leathery wings, and a sinewy tail topped with a poison stinger. As relatives to greater dragons, they aren't as powerful as their colorful cousins, but that doesn't make them any less lethal for the average adventurer. Their bite and claws are razor sharp, and the poison within their stinger burns through a victim's bloodstream, disintegrating veins and arteries on its way to the heart. The lethality of this poison is so great that it actually makes wyverns a target for foolhardy alchemists, seeking to claim the venom to coat weapons with or create poisons. When hunting, wyverns prefer to do so from the skies, only choosing to land if they cannot reach their prey from the air. If they are forced to the ground, they try to stay low, keeping their stinger poised to defend themselves. Once a target is spotted, the wyvern attacks with all its might, moving straight towards its target with no greater thoughts or tactics. If its meal ticket decides to flee or hide, the wyvern will guard the escape routes, unleashing its stinger when the opportunity arises. Should a target elude the wyvern for a longer period of time, however, it will eventually give up, returning to the skies to find some easier prey to pounce on. As a final tidbit, while terrifying in concept, a wyvern can be tamed to be an exotic mount option, though that's easier said than done. They would have to be raised as a hatchling to have the greatest chance of success, but the wyvern's violent temperament has led to the death of many would-be riders. Now that we've examined their lore, let's pivot over to the wyvern's stat block. The wyvern is a large dragon, about the size of a Greyhound bus. Mechanically, they take up 10 feet on a battle map, and as cousins of dragons, they're still large reptilian predators, but generally are less intelligent and magical when compared to real dragons. Speaking of a lack of intelligence, wyverns just barely meet the threshold for maintaining rational thought, making them slightly more intelligent beasts. For context, they have the same intelligence as an ogre, which should say more than enough about their ability to do long division. Because of this, the wyvern is considered unaligned, and lacks any sense of morality or ethics. Their stats make them about as fast as griffins with double the hit point pool, with an armor class of 13, 13d10 plus 39 hit points for an average of 110, a movement speed of 20 feet, and a flying speed of 80 feet. For ability scores, they have high strength, constitution, and wisdom, with strength being their highest at +4, average dexterity, and low intelligence and charisma. As stated before, this low intelligence just barely qualifies them to be sentient creatures, but don't expect them to be able to hold a conversation. As a CR6 monster, their ability to spot prey does get a nice boost from their +3 proficiency bonus and a hefty +4 to perception. On top of that, they also get dark vision with a range of 60 feet, but cannot speak or understand any languages. Not getting any unique skills or abilities, we can move on to their combat actions. The Wyvern makes 2 attacks per turn, a bite attack and a stinger attack. If it's still flying, its claw attack can replace one of these. All of these are melee attacks with a +7 to hit, but they do have distinct nuances that give the Wyvern some choices to make with their attacks. The bite attack has a +7 to hit, a reach of 10 feet, and deals 2d6 +4 piercing damage. The claw attack has a +7 to hit, a lower reach of 5 feet, but deals 2d8 +4 slashing damage. The stinger has a +7 to hit, a reach of 10 feet, deals 2d6 +4 piercing damage, and forces the target to make a DC 15 Constitution saving throw, taking 7d6 poison damage on a failed save or half as much damage on a success. Considering the better reach of the bite versus the better damage of the claws, I could see how a Wyvern might choose one or the other while in flight, but I don't think they would ever choose to swap out their stinger attack for their claw attack. With these actions in mind, the Wyvern can do between 34 and 48 average damage per turn. Lastly, we have their environment tags. Hunters of the skies, Wyverns can generally be found in hill or mountain biomes. Now that we've sorted out their stat block, let's examine how the Wyvern behaves in combat. To do this, we're going to take their lore and stat block and combine that with some presumptions about monster behavior from Keith Amon's The Monsters Know What They're Doing. The first of Amon's assumptions is that most creatures want to survive, and if seriously wounded, will try to flee combat, though there can be exceptions. The Wyvern's lore explicitly states that it only backs down if it sustains serious injury or if its prey eludes it long enough. If we assume the threshold for serious injury to be 1/3 of a creature's average health, the Wyvern would be seriously wounded when reduced to 37 hit points or fewer. Next up, let's look at their alignment. As unaligned creatures, alignment doesn't really come into play in their decision-making. Wyverns hunt to kill, and generally follow a direct path to their prey when doing so, which can lead to them being easily tricked by witty or clever creatures. With alignment sorted, let's look at their mental ability scores in greater detail. Wyverns have an intelligence score of 5. With regards to intelligence scores of 7 or less, Amon states that the creature operates off of instinct alone, and can't really adjust their tactics on the fly. For Wyverns, this just means they're slightly more cunning than an ordinary beast, but lack the intelligence of their draconic cousins. They attack in a straightforward manner, swooping down from the skies to attack with their bite and stinger. On top of that, Wyverns also have a wisdom score of 12. With regards to wisdom scores of 12 or 13, Amon states that these creatures choose their targets carefully, and may refrain from combat if it seems unwinnable. Despite their straightforward tactics, Wyverns can still pick out a good target from a bad one. A meal that runs and hides is frustrating to deal with, and while it will try to back creatures into a corner, if its prey continues to elude it, the Wyvern will eventually go for an easier target. With their mindset sorted, let's look at their physical stats that influence how they fight. The Wyvern contains no ranged attacks on their stat block, though even if they did, their +0 dexterity modifier wouldn't help them much anyways. As such, they rely on their +4 strength and melee prowess when fighting. One interesting thing about their melee attacks, though, is that their bite and stinger both have a 10-foot reach. meaning they avoid attacks of opportunity from melee attacks that can only reach 5 feet. This makes polearms and bugbears slightly better at fending off a wyvern, as their added reach lets characters punish the wyvern with opportunity attacks. This also adds an extra layer of tactics to their attacks, as they can only use their claw attack while flying. So, DMs running a wyvern will have to choose between the safety of a 10-foot reach on their attack or the better damage dice of the claw attack. As part of this melee harassment, wyverns need to be able to maneuver into their 10-foot melee range. Since their regular movement speed is laughably slow, they're likely to focus on their flying speed to accomplish this. With these physical stats in mind, the wyvern appears to be yet another flying skirmisher, using its enhanced reach and 80 feet of flying speed to multi-attack an enemy from 10 feet above, then fly away before ending their turn in the safety of the skies. Even with this assertion, the wyvern can still suffice as a brawler enemy if it lands or is forced to the ground. Sure, its armor class is only 13, but with an average of 110 hit points, it can still last a round or two on the ground before it gets seriously wounded. Finally, like many of the flying creatures I've covered, the wyvern can also grapple an enemy, fly up in the sky, and then drop their target to deal fall damage. However, I personally think that their kit is good enough on its own that DMs don't really need to do this, but know that if the battlefield presents this opportunity, the wyvern would be keen enough to drop an annoying enemy off a cliff. The last major premise from Amon is that any creature gets their movement, action, bonus action, and reaction. Any creature in D&D will have evolved in accordance with this rule, and will combine their movement, actions, bonus actions, and reactions to maximize their action economy. While they don't get any special bonus actions, the wyvern does have a pretty in-depth action economy thanks to its multi-attack. Once they pick a target, wyverns will prefer to fight in the air, using their 80 feet of flying speed to circle above their prey. If forced to the ground, their limited 20 feet movement speed really hinders them, so they're going to want to get back into the air as soon as possible. Once it swoops down to within 10 feet, the wyvern will use its bite and stinger attacks on the first target it focuses on, utilizing the poison in their stinger to deal massive damage on enemies that fail the saving throw. While in the air, they may also swap out their bite attack with a claw attack. But since attacks of opportunity require the user to have a melee weapon equipped, I think they would only do so against ranged or caster characters. This allows them to deal higher potential damage while still not suffering any opportunity attacks. After using its action, the wyvern will then fly away with whatever flying speed it has left, relying on its reach to avoid any potential attacks of opportunity. On subsequent turns, the wyvern will repeat this process until the enemy starts to get really wounded. Once that happens, they may choose to land and finish off their target, consuming them on the spot so long as nothing else is still attacking them. Should the wyvern get seriously wounded while fighting, they'll simply fly off and begin looking for easier targets. With their action economy examined, let's finish up this section by looking at how they work when fighting in a group. The wyvern's current lore doesn't really indicate that they like to fight in groups, and their older lore is pretty explicit that they're solitary creatures. As a result, it's highly unlikely that any adventuring party would encounter a group of wyverns. That being said, they can be found serving their draconic cousins, and as such may be found within groups of other, more powerful dragons as a lesser minion. Even with that possibility though, the wyvern is not clever enough to use any different tactics, focusing its aggression on one target at a time as they swoop in and out of combat. So, with all of that laid out and applied to wyverns, what do we now know about how to use them in our encounters? First, wyverns are cousins to the fabled dragons. hunting humanoids along the borders of civilization. Flying across the skies around hills or mountains, the sight of a wyvern invokes fear and alarm, with many other monstrosities, like manticores, fleeing at the sight of them. Second, hunting in areas where civilization begins to fade into wilderness, the wyvern travels mostly solo. Despite this solitary nature, they may still fight on behalf of more powerful dragons, adding themselves to their ranks as a minion. Third, in combat, wyverns will swoop within 10 feet of their targets, using their bite and stinger multi-attack to burst enemies down with massive damage. If an enemy can't use an opportunity attack, they may swap their bite attack for a claw attack, dealing more damage so long as they can stay relatively out of danger. Fourth, if reduced to 37 hit points or fewer, a wyvern will begin to flee from combat, using its high flying speed to escape to the skies. Prey that is able to hide or escape from the wyvern may be able to make it go away as well, as the wyvern will get bored rather quickly before moving on to an easier food source. Fifth, if a wyvern wins a combat encounter, they will kill and devour their prey on the spot. I mean, the reason they're attacking in the first place is to try and eat you, and they're barely more intelligent than basic beasts, so if a fight starts going badly against a wyvern, your best chance of survival is to run or hide. With that, we come to the end of today's video on the wyvern. A less powerful and magical draconic enemy, the wyvern is a great lower-level introduction for adventuring parties to say that they've actually fought a dragon in Dungeons & Dragons. While their lore and stats are rather basic, that doesn't make them any less dangerous, and having a wyvern roaming an area of wilderness will be more than enough to keep the party on their toes. All that being said, what I want to know is, what do you think of the wyvern? Do you like these lesser dragons as a lower-level encounter? Or are they a bit too simple to be fun to fight against? You can let me know down in the comments, or you can discuss it on the Altroll Discord using the link in the description. If you want to support Altroll, you can visit our Ko-fi to leave a one-time or recurring donation. And make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified when our videos go live. However, that's all I had for you. Thank you all for watching, make sure to have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all of you next time.